Aloha kako. People are still loading on. So, welcome to Hilo Hawaii via Zoom. And I see there's a number of you from different parts of this earth here. My name is Taupori Tangaro, and let me just rearrange and get a little bit more light on my face here. I'm a professor of Hawaiian Studies at Hawaii Community College, and I work also closely with the Office of the Chancellor, the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And the University of Hawaii is in a really great opportunity to grow indigenous leaders, to grow indigenous leadership. And more, and can't get any more timely than this, that, it's the indigenous knowledge that's rising worldwide, that's giving us the clues on how to bring balance back to the lives that we live on this shared space. So we have a program called Mōkaulele, one of many other programs that really gives opportunity for us to look at elements of our culture, the elements that were left to us by the kupuna, and how are we using them to grow well-being. And Mōkaulele is specifically looking at the role that culture has in defining and guiding and clarifying indigenous well-being. There are many approaches to well-being. Indigenous well-being is a process by which we don't separate ourselves from the environment we live in. The decisions that we make has to be also beneficial to the mountaintops, to the oceans, to the heavens. We're biologically related to this whole earth. So that's a different kind of leadership. It's not just about administrative leadership or bureaucratic leadership. This is about leadership that is conducive to the health of our indigenous world. We have Kamuela Chun. Kamuela Chun, he comes from a really unique time. He'll be speaking to you about chanting and the role that chanting has in the contribution to the lahui as we lead ourselves and redefine ourselves in this very pressing world at times, and how the chanting also liberates us into a greater way of looking at our relatives worldwide. So I've known Kamu since the early 80s, and he's a student of a number of people, primarily Edith Mōkaulele, who was also a great chant teacher and was a great chant teacher for the lahui. A lot of the people that are solid in chanting today have some ties, direct or indirect ties to Edith Mōkaulele. So I want to leave most of the time with Kamuela. Kamuela, take it away. Go where you want to go with this, buddy. And again, welcome. If you do have questions, I do believe you can put them in the chat. We may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we can save these questions and we can forward them to Kamuela. And consider this the beginnings of a discussion. If you want to carry on this dialogue, then you can contact us and we can surely grow this further. Kamuela-chan?
Aloha, everyone. Aloha.
Aloha.
This is really amazing to be able to do this today and share with you some things about the Kumulipo. I think more so it's also about how especially in our contemporary times, chanting and protocol has become an important and integral part of what we see in Hawaiian leaders, what we expect of Hawaiian leaders. And so that said, I want to mahalo Taupori for inviting me to share with you this presentation on the Kumulipo. It's entitled Chanting the Universe. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you, for the first half hour, we'll talk about the Kumulipo and we'll share some examples. At least we'll give you a general understanding of the Kumulipo and what it is and such. There's a lot to digest and to think about and to ponder about what the Kumulipo offers us. And so as such, if you have any questions or if you have any thoughts about it, I'm going to keep this discussion open. So just raise your hand or put a question in the chat box or just unmute and say something. Okay, so we'll keep it pretty loose. We'll keep it pretty open. So we'll take, like I said, we'll take the first half hour to talk about the Kumulipo. Just by a show of hands, how many people have some kind of general understanding of the Kumulipo and what it is? Okay, well, that's kind of good. Let me, hold on, let me, okay. So if you look at this, so today, I hope, and I have to say this, that I'm not the expert on the Kumulipo, but I do have some understanding of it from having done it before. Back in 1998, I think it was, or 87, 88. It was 87, 86. A friend of, 97. A friend of mine asked if I could teach her chanting. And this was in Honolulu. At the time I was working in Honolulu. And so from there, the class kind of grew from 1 to 4 to 6 to 8. And so there came a time when we had enough people to be able to put together something really nice, because we knew in 1999, the World Indigenous Conference on Education was happening in Hilo. So in preparation for that, we took on the challenge of being able to present the Kumulipo at that event. And so it was a nice event. Anyway, so, but because of it, was able to get a better understanding of the Kumulipo. So I hope our presentation today will help to contribute to your understanding. There's some lessons gleaned from the Kumulipo that we recognize. I mean, there's a lot of different things. So I'll go over each of the wa, and we can talk about them. But in order to have a better understanding, we have to kind of understand, like with a lot of Hawaiian chants, understanding the literal to understand the figurative. So it's not just a matter of taking it literally, but understanding what that literal sense is, what that figurative sense is about. Okay, so, and we'll go and talk about a little bit of something like that. And I think you'll get, after a while, you get to understand a little bit more about what the Kumulipo is sharing with us. There's a sense of balance. A lot of, in particular, the first 4 wa of the Kumulipo is very dualistic in nature, and we'll see examples of that. And then in putting together this presentation, I know Taupori this is about leadership. So I was wondering if there's anything that we could identify in the Kumulipo, or what leadership qualities might be gleaned from the Kumulipo. And it's a little hard there's nothing very specific, so it's what we can glean from it that I think will help us with our development. Okay, and in the end, the second half hour, we're going to talk about how are chants used to strengthen the lahui? Is there a place for it? And certainly something for you to ponder too, especially in light of what's happened on top of the mountain, up Mauna Kea. We've seen some really, really wonderful examples of Native Hawaiian leadership development through the use of chants and through the execution of protocol. So we'll talk about that too. So I hope, and then if there's anything else that you folks want to talk about, just put it in the chat, and we'll go ahead and try and address that. Okay. As you know, the Kumulipo is a sacred prayer. It was written for Ka'i Mamau from his mother, Alapa'iwahine. From his through the line of Alapa'iwahine, not his mother, but through the line of Alapa'iwahine. And it starts. O ke wika huli velata honua, o ke wika huli lo le talani, o ke wiku ka ia kala, e ho malamba lamba ita malamba. O te au o makari I ta po, ta vale vale ho kumuhonua ia. O te tumu o ta ripo I lipo ai. O te tumu o ta po I po ai. O ta ripo lipo, o ta ripo lipo. O ta ripo ta la, o ta ripo ta po. O vale hoi. Hanau tapo. Hanau tumulipo I tapo he kane. Hanau po ele I tapo he wahine. Thus starts the chant Kumulipo. A time when the earth was hot. A time when the heavens turned about, a time when the sun was darkened to cause the moon to shine, and the time the rise of the Pleiades. What does this tell us within these first lines? The recognition that when you have movement, there's some type of heat and friction that happens. There's a recognition of this turning, and there's a recognition of time from the sun. There's a recognition of telling time by the moon, and there's a recognition of telling time by use of the stars. So just within those first several lines, there's a lot of information that we glean about the thought process of the Hakumele who put this together. This was a time when slime, the vale, was the source of the earth. The time of darkness. Everything started in darkness. And born was the night. Born was Kumulipo, a male, and born was Po'ele, a female. These two, you'll see the pairing of Kumulipo, Po'ele, and their progenitors throughout the Kumulipo. So, there are 16 wa, or time periods, within the Kumulipo. Of the wa, they're divided in half. So the first 7 wa, things are born of nature and of the gods. The themes that we can glean from them are really about pairing, the relationships, dualism, perhaps the gestation of an embryo, and perhaps the migration of sediment. Let's go over some of these wa, and I'll show you these patterns that you might come to recognize. So I'm going to Kalamite, but I am going to switch between these. So now you see the chant itself. This is the text of this is Kalakawa's text. And we just started from line 1. As you see, Handau Kumulipo I tapo he kane, handau po ele tapo he wahi. Handau ka uko ako handau kana he ako ka handau ki ko enu he eli ho opu no handau kana he ko ipuka. Handau tape kana he ki. There's a pairing, there's a birth of all these invertebrates. And it goes on and on and on. So the structure, what you see here, is that you have this prologue, you have like an intro, you have this hundo of all these from the from the lowest forms, the ukuko'ako'a, the coral, all the way to the V. And then it goes into this third section of Hanau Kane Yawai Ololi o Kawahine Yawai Olola. Hanau ka e kahano hui kai kia I e ki kahano hui uka. E o he e kawawa hinu e wai kai e kala au. O kia kua ki komo a o I komo kanaka. So born was Kane, born was a man of the narrow stream, born was a woman of the broad stream. Broad was the Ekaha that dwelled in the sea, guarded by the Ekahakaha fern that lived on the land. He po he kawawa, darkness slips into the night, earth and water are the food for the plants. The God enters, but man cannot. So it repeats this pattern here. And you see this pairing going from the Ekaha to Ekahakaha, what's in the ocean, what's on the land. It's really interesting, to think about what this might mean for us. So in the early stages, what does it mean that water and food, water and earth are the food for the plants? What does it mean that God enters and man does not? Is this the start of the God conscious? God conscious enters, but human consciousness has not been developed yet. This pattern is repeated in the first 4 wa of the Kumulipo. This pattern of Okane ya vai ololi, o wahine ya ka vai olola. And now the example, and then guarded by whatever on the land. And in the first wa, we hear that water is the food for the plants. It is interesting because now at the epilogue, the last part of this wa, it talks about kane huawai akua kena. O ka lina ka wai ho'oluai, o ka huli ho'o ka wo honua, o pai ai ka au tamanawa, o he e au lo tapo, o piha, o piha, o piha u, o piha a, o piha e, o piha o te ta'ohonua pa'atalani, o lewa te au ya Kumulipo tapo. So this here talks about the man with the water garden. He is the God. So in all of the first 7 wa, God consciousness is there. The idea that nature and natural developments are there. We move into the second wa, and the second wa, you have the development of the marine vertebrates. So you see here the i'a, nai'a, mano, moano, all the fishes. And it goes all the way down. You might recognize some of the fish names, some of them you might not, but it goes into this pattern again. O kane ya wai ololi o kawahine ya wai olola. Hanau ka pahaha no hui kai, kia I e ka pahaha no hui uka. He po he I ka wawa hinuku he kai ka la aka i'a. O kia kua ki komo a oi komo kanaka. Again, God consciousness enters, but human consciousness does not at this point. But what's interesting about this now is, what is food for the fish? It's the seawater, the kai. So in the first wa, we have wai. In the second wa, we have kai. And as it goes down, you'll see this pattern repeated with the pairing of what's by the ocean and what's in the ocean and what lives on the land. Until we come down to the epilogue, which in my opinion is a beautiful, beautiful thing. O ke ka ina palawa e ka ine o kuiwi o ha'ai tambo wana. O ka opule ka ilolo a mano a wale ki ka ia lako. O ku mimi o ka lohe lohe apa. O ka moni moni ke alo kolomio mio I hele. No api mo I te polikua. O hika wai nui o hika waina. O pule hule ha ako. Ka mene a ahua awa. O li poki I ke au iau liu. O eleva le tamoana po vehi vehi. He kai ko ako no kauli o paliu. O he wale ta aina ia la ko ka kauli uli wale ta po. Oh no. And so it says here, the train of whales pass. What do the whales represent? The alii, heading around the depths of the sea as a long line of opule fish. Who are the opule fish representing? The kahuna. And so we start to see the start of this migration moving out from their homeland into the sea. And the sea is good for them. You see at the very end here, line 270, O he'evale ta'aina yalako. As they journey out into the sea, can you just imagine what's happening? Night is falling, and off in the distance, they see that the seashore, the land is getting darker and darker. O kahauli uli vale tapo, and it is still night. By the third wa, we have introduced the birds, which is kind of interesting. And so you have this pairing of birds, excuse me, not birds. You have the egg, the insects and the birds. And so you see here, this is what the third wa talks about. And so they're making their way off, and there's this pairing of the birds. And then you have Handau Kania Wai Olio Kawainia Wai Olola Handau Kalupe no Hoi Kai Kia I ke lupe ake ke no Hoi Uka. He po he kawawa he hua ka he o ka ai a ka manu. O ke akua ki komo a oi komo kanaka. So born was man of the narrow stream, and born was the woman of the broad stream. Born was a stingray living in the sea, and he was and guarded by the lupea keke that dwelled in the land. Nights, darkness slips into light. Seed and food and flesh are the food for the birds. Again, human consciousness does not enter. Man, the akua consciousness, God's consciousness, is still there. So it continues along with that, and then you'll see the structure here. O ka leina keia ka manu o halulu, o ki wa'ao ka manu kanihana. These two are kind of interesting, the halulu and the ki wa'ao. We won't go into who they are or what significance they play here, but that's for another discussion. It's still po though. Po, it's still the night. In Wa'iha, we're introduced to those things that crawl. And just to give you, I've asked a friend of mine and a colleague if he wouldn't mind sharing this Wa'iha, this first part of Wa'iha. Kaliko, are you on?
Yo mai, aloha, aloha.
Would you honor us with Wa'iha, the first part of Wa'iha?
Okay, higino, wa. E kukulu I te aia la o ke ape au moa ka I mauli o ka ke kai no o kolo mai o hua tau hana o kolo kua o kolo alu o pane e te alo o nua te tu o te alo o tu mili nane o pano ia o pano o kane a ka po pano I hanau o ka po pano ke kane o po lalo e hini kawaini anau ka naka o hua o lua o hua lau hita po ere ia na ala o ta tu iene ela o ta mali he pu ione o tamata po pano I hanau ta po.
And the night gave birth. Mahalo, Kaleikoa. I love it when you do that. So you see here now, we've got these creatures that start crawling. Turtles, reptiles, lizards, crabs, lobsters. They use the same poetic techniques. Hanau kania wai oli o kawinia wai olala, hanau kahonu no hoi kai, kia ia e ki ku no honua no hoiuka. He pohe I ka wawa hinu he lai ka aia a kolo. O ke kua ki komo a oi komo kanaka. Born is the man of the narrow stream, born is the female of the broad stream. The turtle, born is the turtle living in the sea. Guarded by the miles, is a ku honua living on the land. Darkness slips into night. Leafy vegetables is food for the crawlers. The god enters, man does not. Again, like I said, the God consciousness is all present in here. Human consciousness is not. As we go on down into the verses, we see in Wa Elima, this is the time of Po Kano and Po Laluli. Each of the Wa has a pairing of Po. But who is it that's born, that's introduced in Wa Elima? In Wa Elima, we are introduced into starts the mammals. So the one that's introduced here is the pua'a. Handau tapua'a hiva ikeo, the pig of highest rank, born in the time. And thus they give handau kapo'o wa'awa'a he wa'awa'a kona, handau kapo'o haha he paha, handau kapo'o paha he paha laha, handau kapo'o hiva he hiva luna. There's a listing of characteristics that are really interesting here, because why would they start listing some characteristics? Could it be that as we started, if we take the theme of the gestation of a child, is this where in the uterus, with the formation of the baby, this is where perhaps they are starting to come to some stage in the development where they're starting to take on some physical characteristics, some mental characteristics. But this is what's introduced in Wa Elima. And so it's the pua'a there. In Wa Eono, the animal that's introduced there is the rat. And so why would the rat play such a prominent place within the Kumulipo? So we asked that question. What is it about the rat that and his standing in society? Maybe perhaps, oh sorry, my dogs are barking. Maybe perhaps as we move on and we see Wa Ehiku, in the 7th era, we're introduced to the dog, and we're introduced to the pe'a, the bat. So what does this all mean for us in terms of, if we're looking at multiple themes here, if we start from Wa Ikahi, where water is the food for the plants, into Wa Ilua, where seawater is the food for the fishes. And then we go into the birds, and we see this migration starting to happen you know, from the homelands as it makes its way across the ocean with the fishes, and then flying on to following the birds in the ocean, and then coming to some type of land or shore where they're starting to crawl. What happens there? They start to crawl, they start to etch out their lives on this new land, and then they start their cultivation. They start cultivating the land as the pua'a would as he digs into the land. And then from there, they've grown to such a society that now there's the need for some rules and laws and some rules and laws. So this is where perhaps who does that? What happens to that society? So I'm sorry if I'm kind of confusing you, but if we take a look at who's introduced first within the Kumulipo, we talk about that which is Kane, the giver of life. And then as they move into the ocean, that which is within the realm of Kanaloa. And then as they move into the land and they start cultivating the land, that which is within the realm of Ulona. But as they grow to such a point where now, with the introduction of the dog in the seventh wa, you have Ku, who helps to bring some order to the civilization. So I suggest that as one of the possible themes. If we're looking at the theme of the gestation of the child, you know, from the early embryos and how it's moving in the womb and how it moves and then how it starts to grow, you know, as it starts to move, and, you know, the mother can feel it moving, and then the development of some of the characteristics, both physical and mental characteristics. And then as it gets ready to come out, and as it gets ready to come out, we see at the very end, okay, here, line 589. Puka kapea pea lohe lohe. Puka kapea pea hulu hulu. Puka kapea pea lau mana mana. Puka kapea pea hana e aku. Kapo he e nalo mai hanau. Oh no, it's still night. But the pea represents that child as he's ready to come, as he or she is ready to come out, turned upside down, hanging with his head down, ready to enter into the world. So that's the first the first 7 wa of the Kumulipo. I hope it gives you just an idea of some of the possible themes that you might see. Now, we haven't really touched too much upon the themes of dualism, but there's a lot to be had in another discussions about that, about the relationships, of what's in the ocean and what's in the sea. How does that relate to us, and what do we do to recognize the importance of these particular relationships? Okay. Now in Wa Evalu, in the 8th Wa, this is the start of mankind. So from Wa Evalu all the way to to the 16th Wa, this is all about humans. Okay. O kama ia ne o kama ke au po kini o kama ke au po he nalu mama. Now ta na ko me he lau hanau kana ke wai olali hanau ka hine ia wai olala hanau ta po akua. O kanaka I kuku o kanaka I mo lau ta po mama. Hina wale kanaka e ka ine ha ula wale ka lai o ke akua. Ha ele ko ke ka naka ha ke wale ka auai. O mali no I ke au I po kini ho la I me po he nalu mama. I kapa ia la Now la he wahine. Now ki he kane. Hanau kane he akua. Hanau kanalo o ka he hauna wela ia. Hanau tapahu o mo anali. Kawau ma'au kele ko lawa hope mai. O tu polo li ili ali imua kona muli o ke kanaka o la loa laua laua li. Thus starts the genealogy for this chief Ka'i'imamau. Who is the first woman? La'ila'i. Who is the next born? Ki'i. Who is the next born? Kane. And who is the fourth born? Kanaloa. So you have La'ila'i, Ki'i, Kane, Kanaloa, Moanaliha, Kawau Ma'aukele, Ku Pololi Iliali Imua Oloipo. This is the succession that the Kumulipo tells us. So, La'ila'i was the firstborn, Ki'i is the secondborn, Kane is the thirdborn. And so for the next subsequent wa, the whole story is about what happens there for the next 4 wa or so. Okay, why is this important? Let me switch back here. Well, let me show you something here. So in Wa Eva, in the 9th Wa, we have this reiteration of this story of La'ila'i, Ki'i, and Kane. In Wa Umi, this also speaks to us about what happens here. Let me just switch back here so that you can see kind of what I want to share with you. Okay. So, like I said, so the genealogy starts with La'ila'i, Ki'i, and Kane in the 8th Wa. And it continues with them and the birth of Ha'apo'ele, Ha'apopo, Olohe, who was also called Maila and Lo Palapala. Okay. In the next Wa Umi, they take up the quarrel of succession, for Kamaha'ina, son of Ki'i, with La'ila'i, takes preference over Hakea, son of Kane, in the establishment of the long line of chiefs that we find in Wa 11, Umikumamakahi. The senior line belongs to the offsprings of Ki'i, and the junior line goes to the offsprings of Kane. Do you think that sits well with Kane? Of course not. It doesn't. So these are the offsprings that we know of La'ila'i, Ki'i, and Kane. So in the beginning, what we here have is Ha'apo'ele, Ha'apopo, Olohelohilua, who's also called Maila, and Lo Palapala. These are 3 wahine. These are the corresponding lines to where they come from. Now, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if this is from Kane or this is from Ki'i. I will say that Kavenna Johnson has it listed as children of Kane. So, following that, as you go through the Kumulipo, it's a little hard to discern whether they're actually from Kane or whether they're from Ki'i. But La'ila'i also has children from Ki'i. La'iolo is the same person. It's a Kane. I think it's a Kane. It doesn't say. There's Kapopo, then there's Kamaha'ina, there's Kamamule, Kamamainau, Kamakulua or Kamakalua, Po'eli'i, Po'eli'a, Vehi Vela, Vehi Loa. These are the children of La'ila'i and Ki'i. Then you have the children. What happens is that La'ila'i goes back to Kane. It has Ha'i, who's a female, Hali'a, a female, and Hakea, who's a Kane. So Kamaha'ina and Hali'a mate together and they have loa'a. And so, you know, it's really, really interesting because there's this friction between kane, ki'i, and la'i that you'll find in the Kumulipo. Why is this story so interesting and of importance to be put into the Kumulipo? I think that's something that we can discuss later on if we want to try to glean some kind of insight or lesson as to what's important about understanding this relationship here, other than saying it just happened. You know what I mean? So there you have this succession. So Loa'a is the son of Kamahina and Hali'a. And from Loa'a to Pola'a, there are 813 generations. Let me go back to the Kumulipo here. So here's where we were talking about. Handau kamaha'ina he kane, handau kamamole kona muli, handau kamamaindau kona waina, handau kamakulua kona poki I he wahine. Noho kamaha'ina ya kane ya he kane ya hali'a. Handau loa'a ke kane. So loa'a ke kane, Nakilea kawahine. Loa'a was the husband and Nakilea was the wife. And then we have the pairing of their descendants, all the way down till we come to Pola'a. So Lo'ipo and Kilika have a son, Pola'a. What happens at that point? Handau ka'ino, handau keau, handau kapahupahu kapohaha, handau kahalu kahalo ke kahan, kanakulu kahono nauewe, ho'ilori ke kai pi'i tamauna, ho'omu kawai pi'i kuahale, pi'i koni hia pi'i napo kanikaua, lele na I hea kaui ka hoi, apua apu e o yakana loa kanika hoi. Handau po e lua I ke alo wā kea, handau po ino, handau po mai kai, handau tamoa I ke kua wā kea. Make ku pololi ilia li imua lo'ipo. Make ke au kaha o piko kahono, oia pukanga. Hua na lau. Nalo I ka po lio. Thus ends this whole line with Pola'a. But what happens? The moa sits on top of the back of Wakea, indicating some right to now rule. So Wakea fits importantly in this. But I want to also note for you, this name, Kupololi Ilia Ibuolo Ipo, starts here on line 1118. So Maki'i and Auhe'e have a child, Kupololi Ili. And he mates with Ihai and has Kupoka. Mates with Milio and has Kupo Kanaka. And thus starts the Kupo line here. Kupolo. It goes all the way down for a while, the Kupolo line. And then you get into the Polo line. Goes all the way down, Polo, and all the Polo chiefs. And then it gets into the Li'ili line. And from the Li'ili line, then it changes in, you get the Ali'i line 1319. We get into the Ali'i line. And then from the Ali'i line, we get into the Mua line. And from the Mua line, we then get into the Lo'ipo or Lo'i line. And then from Lo'i into the Lo'ipo, who is the last before Po La'a. So it's kind of interesting. So this whole line dies out. This is a time kind of indicated by as a terrible tsunami. But make ku pololi ili ali inuolo ipo. This whole line dies. Okay, so what happens next? In Wa Umikumalua, in the 12th Wa, they went back to Opu'upu. It starts with Opu'upu. And if you look at Opu'upu, Opu'upu occurs where does Opu'upu come in? Here we go. I didn't know I saw. Here we go. 1333. So Opu'upu from Ali Honu Pu'u and Ka'ea Honu, they have Opu'upu. So from Opu'upu, now the line went this way. Then they started with Opu'upu here and came down. And so for Wa Umikumalua, you have it from Opu'upu all the way down to Wakea. So this is Wakea's genealogy. From starting with Opu'upu and La'aniha. Okay, and it ends with Haloa. So you see where Wakea and Papa are within the Kumulipo. It's kind of interesting their juxtaposition in the Kumulipo. Okay, 13th Wa. It starts with Paliku. Where is Paliku on this line? He's back up here on line 1710. So he's the son of Palipalihia and Paliomahilo. Hanau Paliku, Hanau Ololo, Hanau Olohonua, Hanau Kumuhonua, Okane, e Maumahoe, o Kanaloa, he Maumahoe. Kane and Kanaloa are the twins, and Ahukai is the Muliloa. These are their wives. So Paliku, this is where Paliku comes in, and this is where that line. So we went from Loa'a down to Pola'a, then went over to Opu'upu'u down to Wakea. Now we're going from Paliku down to Haloa again. So again, but this is through Papa's line. So this is Papa's lineage. Okay, so then in the 14th era, we start with Li'aiku Honua. And where does he come in all of this? Well, Li'aiku Honua is found up here. Okay, here we go. So Papa He'enalu and Hanauna have a child. And they're born within Pu'ukahonua Lani is Li'aiku Honua and his younger brother, Ohomaila. So Ohomaila and Honua Kau mate, and their genealogy. So this is where Haumea and Papa come in. So when I say Papa or Haumea, just recognizing her as the reincarnation within all of these different generations. Okay, so, but this is Papa's line through Ohomaila. But as I said, Li'aikuonua is the start of the 14th genealogy, the 14th wa. So from Li'aikuonua, again, we get into the genealogy of Wakea. But let's see, what do I want to point out for you? So again, here we recognize Wakea's right to rule with this line, Handau Kamoa Kauikikua Wakea line 1918. And but now introduced into this wa are all these star names, which is really interesting. But the idea, but for us now, we're just going to take with us the idea that Li'aikuonua, this is the line all the way down. This is another line all the way down to Wakea. Okay, and then in the 15th wa, we have the reincarnation of Haumea in her Mo'opuna. This is the genealogy of Ki'o, continuing through the Ulu line all the way down. This is the, yeah. Okay, and all the way through down, it goes and continues all the way down to Maui. And then in the last wa, then we get into Maui and his generation that goes all through the Ali'i, which is kind of interesting, the Ali'i of Maui through Kaulahea, Kahekili, Kawau Ka'auhele, and then moves over to the island of Hawaii when Pi'ikea, the daughter of Laie Lohe and Pi'ilani, moves over to Hawaii Island and mates with Umi and marries Umi. So we come to the end of this particular, we come to the end of the Kumulipo with the exclamation of Ahu. Ya ahua I, ya lono I kamakahiki. The original name for Ka'i'i Mama, the first name for Ka'i'i. So, sometimes when you try to decipher the Kumulipo this way, it makes it sound, it seems to be a little more interesting. But the question is, if during the time of Kalakaua, or perhaps even before, if they were looking for a certain genealogy, that means that you could trace your genealogy to a number of different areas if you're able to trace it far back enough, right? You could probably trace your genealogy all the way to La'i if you had your lineage going up to one of the Ali'is and farther back. So it's kind of interesting what the Kumulipo provides us. But the whole gist of it is that it provides for us some kind of base as to how we see this world within the first 7 wa, and then understanding the Ali'i, and then understanding something about the Ali'i and what went on back then. So when we talk about I guess Hawaiian leadership, I mean, I'm not quite sure. I know we'll have 5 minutes to discuss this, but you know, what is it that we're going to glean from the Kumulipo in terms of helping us to develop Native Hawaiian leaders? I mean, certainly we recognize the role the firstborn plays in things. We certainly recognize mana, whether it's inherited or acquired. You know, we have examples of that throughout our history. And I think each of us recognize certain qualities that we like contemporary Hawaiian leaders. You know, one of the things that I've noticed over the years in my time is that, especially when it came to particular issues like kaho'olame, or Honokahua or Mauna Kea is that there started this development of chants and protocol that helped to give all of us a sense of how we move forward. Um, I'm not sure.
Kamu. So maybe I can jump in on at this part, and I think let me see, I can see this grid here. So I think if some of you are like your head is just swirling with information, and that's actually intentional. And Kamuela opened it up early on by saying this is a sacred chant. And in our world, we want to achieve knowledge really quick. We want to pay tuition, get 2 years of all the sacredness we could get within a 2-year system. These chants, these are origin chants, were designed to take a lifetime to truly understand. And then what it meant along the generations also is an interesting discussion here, because what it means to one generation may not necessarily mean the same to the next generation. And, and so you have the continuous growth. This chant is never supposed to end. The chants are supposed to continue. Now, how is this chant used in real world contexts? Is an interesting thing, because this chant was heard in full or in part on Mauna Kea. It's used in a lot of our other areas of when we have to really define what is lahui, what is the kuleana of the lahui, what is the difference between leadership and indigenous leadership. There's a huge difference. Indigenous leadership infers that the furthest back one can go to the darkness. When we lead with that in mind. We cannot lead outside of that reality. The fact that the darkness gave birth to the light, and there's all these vows, but also the chant is continuing. So the stance that we take in leadership has to inform, or has to be grounded in the antiquity possible. So that's why genealogy is so important. We want to know where you're from, who you're from, who's your land base, and what are your decisions being based on? Is your decision being based on just occupation, big business? Because if that business that you want to lead and develop, if that's going to affect the environment, which is the ancestor, then we need to relook at that. Because the decisions that indigenous leaders make have to make sense to the ancestors in the past, but it also has to make sense to the ancestors that are yet to be born. Sometimes we call our children or our great-grandchildren.
That is so true. I mean, especially when we understand what the Kumulipo will help us to understand is our relationship to our environment, which is really a big part of, I think, how we act and how we start making decisions, not just for our lahui, but for ourselves and for our family. But it's our relationships that we have with our environment.
So, I know that some of you may have to leave, and we want to thank you. It was not the intention to answer your questions about Kumulipo. It was, an opportunity to bring an awareness of the fact that we have a Kumulipo. We have to assume that some people don't know we have these origin chants, and we don't have one origin chant. We have many, which gives us the advantage when we have to, provide many facets to our reality. But also to introduce you to Kamuela as well as to Kumulipo, because there are specialists in the community that know about these chants. We want you to contact them. We want you to further the learning. Origin chants plays huge in the courts, in the classroom, in our children development, in our own developments. But Kumulipo, if I could call upon you, because in Kamuela said that was one of the reasons why you would come, if you could share with us, what advantage does knowing one's origin chant have in moments when we have to protect a sacred space? what advantage do we, what advantage knowing, not just knowing in the head, but knowing in the chant, knowing in the body, origin chants, and what role does it have in securing our environment and our values? Can you share that with us in a little bit? If you have to leave, the rest of you, come back next month. We have another, but we want to continue this discussion for a little while longer.
Mahalo, mahalo no ia oi, ke kono ana. I just try to be real brief. But definitely, I've said this many times to my close friends. To me, one of the greatest experiences, and I think experiences, education experiences, both as just work, but in a spiritual experience, has been being able to learn and perform, and even to this day, live the Kumulipo. That's what I would say. I live the Kumulipo.
Live the.
Not and what the Kumulipo taught you is like, for me. What you find out, there's so much to know, that's always a good word, to know and learn beyond just the paper and what you may read, but just in the performance itself. I know that hula people understand it. Just in the performance and chanting itself, there's a life that comes from the pronouncement of those sounds, and those names. And so when you perform the Kumulipo and you learn the Kumulipo, people say the idea of like channeling or living, but for me, especially in the struggles, and whether it was, whether it was up at Mauna Kea or other struggles, I've always had a very strong, it's like it's given me a very strong foundation, 2 feet planted on the ground, and not just in the ground, but everything around you. You want to talk about the sky, you want to talk about the ether, everything around you, where the Kumulipo sets us in this direct connection with everything around us, a backup to the cosmos themselves. And so there's this kind of, there's this kind of mana, or this kind of power that sets into you where, what a Kumulipo teaches, to me, the foundational lesson is that, creation, and this is what creation didn't happen in some billions of years ago, but creation is ongoing, and we are the product of creation. At the same time, we're also the creator in this world that we're heading forward. So it gives you kind of a real strong sense of subjectivity, of being. Whatever you do has this sense of being part of creation. And even for myself personally, because I know my genealogy, Mōkaulele, as I said, so I know that these are my ancestors directly, including those who performed the Kumulipo. People like Pu'o and Heva Heva and Hokai and all those who actually performed it. These are direct ancestors to myself. And so it really provides a kind of, I don't want to use the word courage, that might be the wrong word. Maybe not courage, but it provides that kind of stability maybe, or a foundation that you can feed off of, and so, that's why I always appreciate, Kamuela for taking the lead and taking us down that path. But if I ever change my life and my politics, in a sense of not being something political as being something outside of me, but seeing it as all part, because when you understand the Kumulipo, that's what's going on. It's drama and politics and history and genealogy and all of that, all happening at that time, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so really no different than what's going on for our people today. So I just appreciate Mahalo giving me the opportunity to share, but let's all live the Kumulipo.
All right, mahalo nui. And a great important piece is, these chants, when they were created, they're never intended to be written down. The writing down of our chants began in the 1820s. These chants were designed to become from one body to the next body. They're delivered from the inner universe and in keeping people in communication. So yes, we're very fortunate that our early scholars decided to keep these chants alive. They knew there was be a time when people would not memorize these chants, but they also knew there would be a time when people would wake up and begin memorizing them again, because the chants don't die, they just go to sleep. We just need people like Kamuela, people like Edith Kanakaole, people like Mary Pukui to get, and then we also need world tensions. Interestingly, if we never have world tension, we may not need the chants. Sometimes the tension that is brought into our universe trigger night to happen, this whole Kumulipo process to happen again. So if you are of Hawaii descent, we're very fortunate. We have all of these chants waiting for us. If you live in Hawaii and you are not of Hawaii descent, we're very fortunate. We too have an opportunity to understand what these chants are about and use these chants to help grow indigenous awareness and actions. It's good to have a library full of these chants, but the chants really work when we begin to chant them. If you are from the other part of the world, this is the time. Cousins, world cousins, this is the time. We need to wake those chants up. Those chants will activate our memories. Pick them up, research your chants, research your genealogy, pick them up, because they all say the same thing. We need to evolve, but we need to evolve in terms that will not, I should say, the terms that will grow more life, more spirit. So I want to say mahalo to Kamuela for, again, by design, you know, Kumulipo is going to take a lifetime to memorize. We wanted to give you a teaser of what that is. If you're interested in learning the Kumulipo, then we have people in the community that will assist you in that. But I want to do a little commercial because this is about leadership. And for some people, chanting is what's going to get you into the door to create leadership activities. It's not a concept, it's a lifestyle, it's an action. And some people, it's going to be through the arts, through hula. Hula has fed a lot of leadership potential. You saw hula play large in current platforms for leadership. On the Mauna, hula people came together and we didn't realize, wow, we actually knew a lot. We can actually save a mountain through these hulas. You know, we don't oftentimes learn those hulas for those purposes. We learn the hulas for other things, and only to find out that at the end of the day, in the hula was the very things we needed to pull ourselves together as a lahui, to continue to keep sacred spaces sacred. But I want to do this share screen. And Kamuela, can you end your share screen? Oh,
Yep.
maybe I just did. I want to share this. Yes.
But before you do that, well, one thing I don't want to say is that, you know, in all that we do, there's a process of internalizing what we do, as it is with the Kumulipo, or as it is with our Kuauhau, or as it is with, you know, any other chant that we might learn. The process of being able to internalize, internalize all of this and taking ownership of it is really important. So just thank you for allowing us to have this discussion today about that.
You know, yes, Kamuela, and I think that's a great thing in the simplest terms. When you learn the chant, you begin to own a relationship to that chant. And one chant meaning to one person is quite different. It's the same chant, but people have different understandings of the chant. But when you chant the chant, you become committal. And so what we always talk about, you got to walk the talk. We want people to live the chant, not just chant the chant for entertainment's sake. That is sometimes an entry into chant world. But at one point, we're going to need the chant that you know, that the teacher decided to teach you and you had no reason why you were taught that chant. That chant has a purpose. And one day you'll be called to that purpose. So mahalo Kamuela, internalizing the knowledge system is always great. I always say, answers are good. Questions are better. Because questions keep us engaged. What does this mean? What does the rat have to do with the Kumulipo? And how can the rat help clarify elements of leadership? That's a good question. It will keep us engaged. So yeah, it's not about answer finding.
I have the answer for that.
Yeah, and so that would be the next. Yeah, that would be the next workshop. But ladies and gentlemen, if you could look at this, the next we have Kumula Au Singh, and his entry into leadership is through the weaving arts. And so same thing, we're going to be looking at the weaving arts and see how can the weaving arts help us clarify further what is Indigenous leadership, but not just what is. What can we build from it? We need action. We have enough philosophies out there. We need action. So Kamuela Au is going to be presenting. Then after that will be Kili'i Raichel. And so, you know, you have this flyer with you. And again, it's not designed to answer your questions. It's designed to get you to think and ask yourself questions. What is my place? What is my contribution to Indigenous leadership? And so, yes, step up when the road opens up and that ala opens up and it's time to contribute something to the lahui, you will have something. So mahalo anui. Thank you, Kamuela, and thank you, Kale Koa, and thank you and Tiffany for making sure that the technology was good. See you folks the next time, and yeah, let's keep the dialogue happening. Yeah, ahui ho no kako.